Eric, red states vote Republican, blue states Democrat. If you're born in India, you're likely to be a Hindu. If you're born in the U.S., you're likely to be a Christian. These are very powerful political and religious conceptions of the world, but yet they are concentrated by where you happen to grow up, which shows the power of belief systems. You are a philosopher, and you have focused on the nature of belief as a philosopher. How can that help us understand how organizations and institutions inculcate beliefs in their constituents?
Well, probably one of the things that's going on here is group identity stuff, right? So I'm a member of this group, so I ought to say certain things and I ought to not say other things. But one of the things that I'm inclined to think is that the words that come out of our mouths don't always line up very well with the way we act in the world. And groups are very good at getting you to say certain kinds of things, but the connection between that and actually living in the way that you say is not so clear, I think. So if you take something like all men are created equal, right? That's something that, in the United States, people they like that, right? What does it mean? What would it be to live your life as though that were the case, right? Or, if you go to a religious ceremony, right? So my wife is Jewish, and we go and participate in the temple, and you say certain things, right? And sometimes it feels like they're true, sometimes it feels like they're not, sometimes you're just saying them. I think the group, there's part of wanting to be part of a group or part of wanting to accept a certain kind of worldview that inclines you to want to endorse certain things explicitly. But one of the things that I'm inclined to think about belief is that there's often a pretty big disconnect between what you say and what you do. One of the areas in which I think this comes out most clearly is when you look at the moral behavior of clergy, the moral behavior of ethicists, right? They will often be the spokespeople for certain kinds of worldviews. They will sincerely endorse certain kinds of opinions. It doesn't look like they behave much differently than lay people, or than non-philosophers, non-ethicists, right? So I've talked to a number of clergy about what they think about the behavior of clergy versus the behavior of lay people. Most of the clergy I talk to don't think clergy behave especially religiously, or especially well in their daily lives. And I've done a lot of empirical work myself on the moral behavior of ethics professors. So it doesn't look like ethics professors, for example, behave any differently than non-ethicists, although they often endorse more stringent moral opinions than do non-ethicists.
That's fascinating.
So
what's the implication of that? You spend your whole life teaching and creating rules and ideas and ways of thinking about moral behavior.
Yeah.
And yet, as a class, the moral behavior of that class is no different than anyone else.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out exactly what I want to do with that or what to make of it. Let me give you an example.
It certainly sounds significant.
Here's one case that's really striking to me. So I sent this questionnaire out to ethicists across the United States, and also to these were professional philosophers in philosophy departments, and also to philosophers who didn't specialize in ethics, and also to professors in departments other than philosophy.
Yeah, it's good controls.
And I asked them a bunch of questions about their moral opinions, and then I asked for their self-reports of their behavior on those same issues.
Anonymously, I assume.
Yes. And then I also asked them, in some cases had direct measures of their behavior.
How did you do that?
Well, it wasn't actually anonymous, it was encrypted, right? So I had encrypted coding, right? So a respondent would be assigned a specific number, and that number would be matched with some other data that I had. So one of the results that I had was on vegetarianism, one of the more striking ones to me.
Okay, that's good.
So in the first part of the questionnaire, I asked respondents to rate on a scale from 1 to 9. 1 being very morally bad, 9 being very morally good, 5 being morally neutral. I asked them to rate various things. One of them was regularly eating the meat of mammals, such as beef or pork. And then later in the questionnaire, I did this with Josh Rust, by the way, my co-author on this. Later in the questionnaire, we asked, did you eat the beat of a mammal at your previous evening meal, not including snacks? And in the first part of the questionnaire, I found huge differences in expressed opinions. So 60% of the ethicists rated it somewhere on the morally bad side of the scale. 45% of the non-ethicist professors did, but only 19% of the professors outside of philosophy did. Huge difference. Also, there were differences by age and by gender, and these compounded. So
this is the self-reporting.
This is the self-reporting
of what their belief is.
Of what their belief is, right? So, and these compounded so that the women, the female philosophers, born 1960 or later, more than 80% of them said it was bad, regularly eat the meat of mammal, such as beef or pork. The male non-philosophers, I think it was 7%.
Wow, big difference.
So, I mean, think about that in terms of like a Gallup poll, right? When do you see like a few demographic variables predicting an 81 to 7% split in opinion? Never. I mean, this is as huge as you get in differences in moral opinion. But then in this question about their own behavior later on, no statistically detectable difference among the groups, at least by most of the measures, right? And when there was a difference, it was really pretty subtle. So you get, I think, and I think I see this in like religion too, right? People say things, they mean them, they're really sincere, they put it forward. Maybe they think they live that way. Do they actually live that way? Right? So when I think about what it is to believe, I think it's at least as much about how you live your life as what comes out of your mouth. Right? So these belief systems, these organizations, these philosophers and religious leaders who they inculcate in us certain things that we say, and when we reflect philosophically or religiously, we come to certain opinions that we endorse, but I'm inclined to think we don't really believe them, not fully, if we don't live them.
And so what can we infer from that in terms of organized religion or political parties? People want to have this group identity, which you started with, as a group, but then maybe in their own personal expressions of life, that becomes less important?
The identity is important, and the identity is affirmed as soon as the words come out of your mouth.
Yes, right. So the words affirm the identity.
The words affirm the identity, and then the behavior goes its own way, right? And then maybe after the fact, you can concoct an excuse, or you can feel bad, right? You can say, well, I didn't live up to the tenets of my religion. I feel bad about that, right? But I'm still part of the group because I say it.